Ahoy, hoy, hoy, hoy there, listener, and welcome to this new episode of Irreverend with me, the Reverend J.A. Franklin. And as all the viewers of our podcast will be able to see, he is back after a heartbreaking absence last week, really, in our 20th edition. It is Thomas Redivivus, the man, the legend. He is back with us, the Reverend Thomas Pelham. How are you doing today, T. Pell?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Jamie. I think so. Anyway, every day is much the same as the last, isn't it? At the moment. So, but I think I seem to remember today going to the hardware store and buying some paint, which I brought home to be told that it was the wrong sort of paint. So that gives me another trip to the hardware store ahead.
Are they called hardware stores in England, Tom, or is that some kind of Americanism that you picked up watching Friends?
Do you know what? I think you're probably right. I think they're probably, what are they?
I don't know.
No, I think they are hardware shop.
DIY shop?
DIY, yeah. You can tell.
It's a bit patronising DIY, I always think. Not least because I'm useless at it, so I don't do it myself. I once put up a shelf for Jamie, and it fell off literally the next day, almost onto his son.
Yeah, I just put about 2 books on it, and then it just collapsed everywhere and pulled a load of plaster out of the wall. Fortunately, it wasn't my property, but the property that was destroyed.
It was my first outing with my new drill. That was so.
Yeah, exactly. Starters, you mean to go on?
I have since then successfully put up shelves. I think I used the wrong. What's the bit called? The bit of plastic. Anyway,
Lego.
It's called a rule plug, I think.
That's it, rule plug. Yeah, I used the wrong sort of rule plug for the wall.
Well, if I ever need a shelf put up again,
you won't ask me.
Well, I would like to give you another try. I'd have to get Lorna's permission though, because it was quite traumatic. We should introduce our other host today, Daniel French, once again to offer his thoughts on everything that's going on. Broadcasting today from your kitchen, I think, Daniel.
Dining room.
Oh, dining room.
The house is struggling a bit delivering the heat at the moment, so we're all in shiver mode at the moment because it's a sort of biggish oldie worldy vicarage by the sea, which is lovely in summer, but it can be a little bit brutal with the weather in these times. So yes, we are. I am slightly chattering here, holding a very nice warm cup of tea.
Yeah, it looks good. Is it one of the big vicarages? Like before they sold them all off. All the massive.
Yeah, I don't know how how I got away with this. Actually, it's lovely. So 7 bedroom.
Oh,
nice.
7 bedrooms.
You can have at least 2 bishops to stay. That's the rumour. That's the whole idea. Is supposed to have a room for the bishop, aren't you, or something like that? Or
are you?
I don't know. I always someone keeps telling me this. I'm not sure why. It seems to be in a folk memory. You get a room for you and your wife, a room for male children, a room for female children, and a room for the bishop if the bishop needs to come and stay. Obviously, once upon a time, if the bishop wanted to visit his diocese, he'd have to stay in different places, wouldn't he? So I presume he probably would have stayed overnight with different vicars, because there's no, now that once upon a time, that 20 miles to the next village it's a day's journey, isn't it? So you would have had to.
Yeah.
Anyway.
There's a vicarage down the road from me, a former vicarage. It was sold in the 90s, but it is enormous. It's like a stately home. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's not quite Downton Abbey, but it's on the way there. Just for a small church, in Wilford, which is a suburb where I live. It's not my parish. I live in a different parish to the one I minister in. But honestly, it's an amazing house. It's absolutely incredible. It's like you'd have. It's the kind of house where you'd have servants running around, and
I think it's kind of a lot of them. The problem is really that they were built at a time where the professional clergy was inhabited by the sort of younger sons of nobility, and they did actually have the sort of pocket money to run large households, and obviously there'd be their families were wanting to keep them in the sort of way that they were accustomed to, but now it's not so on a sort of a stipend. It's not quite so achievable anymore, is it?
No, up till about I think 40 years ago, this actually wasn't the vicarage. The vicarage was 100 yards down the road, closer to the sea, with a 20-bedroom mansion that became a hotel with its own croquet lawn.
Wow.
That was subsequently demolished and made into sort of Spanish-like flats. But there's a book that I've seen in the local National Trust house around here about Devon clergy, stories of Devon clergy. And one of the things I picked up, which I hadn't realised, was that these livings were bought and sold at quite a rate, and that there was a whole series of estate agents who specialised in Devon livings, because they were seen as the place to be, and they went for the equivalent in today's money of millions. It cost to become the vicar of, well, it would have been Marlborough here rather than Salcombe, because Salcombe wasn't so much a town then. Would have cost. I'd have had to have raised a couple £1 million in money to have purchased the living, which also included the rents from, I think, about 50 homes.
Yeah. Wow. Daniel, are you near Marlborough? Is that, I didn't realise that. Is that
Marlborough?
Marlborough, Devon.
Yeah, that's not. Yeah. Is that where Roger Scruton lived? I might have got that wrong.
No. He was Marlborough in Wiltshire, I believe, because he was near Chichester. Because I know that because he went and did a Prayer Book Society talk, which was very interesting, on the language of the prayer book.
Yeah.
He went there because he was relatively local, because Marlborough's just down the road from Chichester. Where am I thinking of?
We've had confusion with that, actually. We've got a little Marlborough Primary School. A few years back, an enormous lorry arrived with a Polish driver who's very confused about where... It was a delivery, if I remember rightly, of several hundred bespoke chairs.
Wow.
The Marlborough School.
He had a bit of a drive on his hand.
When he realised he was about 150 miles out, he burst out into tears.
Oh, no. Oh, man.
The local then church warden, who was also doubled up as the postman, thought it was hilarious. But that's just an R. The Marlborough village has an R, whereas the Marlborough Wiltshire doesn't, but it's pronounced pretty much the same. Though it's a lovely village, and we have an 801-year-old church, which at the moment is where we're doing most of our services. But slightly bitter, like the vicarage.
Do you know, the coldest church I've ever been to was the church at Cuddesdon.
Oh yeah, it's cold.
That, I mean, even though it had heating, something about that church building, and it's an ancient church building, but in the winter, it was the depths of winter. It was hat and gloves for services time.
Yeah. It was like the kind of church where when you stood next to the pillars seemed really cold. They seemed to emit coldness. It was bizarre. Yeah. It's a shame, really, because I think that church is really beautiful, actually.
It's very well proportioned. It's a lovely central crossing. Yeah.
Lovely. And a lovely apse at I think it's called the apse, isn't it? The kind of the extreme end.
The chancel, yeah.
Yeah, the chancel, yeah. Sorry, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah, lovely place. Good memories, Tom. Good memories, mostly. Yeah, so chaps, that's a good conversation about vicarages. But shall we bring things right up to date and talk about everything that's going on in the crazy world of the COVID age, the COVID era, as Klaus Schwab would have us put it. Just to say thanks so much for everyone who's got in touch. It's so great to receive increasing amounts of correspondence and encouragement, and we've got some interesting questions to discuss from our listeners this week. And to everyone who's new and is just connected with us, thanks so much for listening. And it's great to have new listeners and to see our stats moving up all the time. And our stats actually were still big last week, Tom, even with you not here. So I don't know what that says to your theory that basically people are tuning in. What was it? There's a correlation between the amount you speak and the amount of listeners we have. A positive correlation.
You know what, Jamie? In the spirit of COVID, I'm not going to change my model. I'm just going to swear that it is true.
Well, at least your model describes reality, Tom, as opposed to trying to manipulate it. So you've got that in your favour. But yeah, so let's talk. We've got loads of stuff to talk about. Even though I think the last week has kind of been a slower news week in some ways, because the big announcement was last week with the roadmap to freedom, or whatever it was, roadmap out of lockdown. Tom, you didn't get a chance to respond to that. Do you want to tell listeners basically what your response was last week?
Well, it's outrageously slow, for one thing. It's again, as we predicted, a movement of the goalposts away from the sort of vaccinations will bring us out of this, to a sort of semi-zero COVID kind of outcome, even though they're claiming that it's not zero COVID. It may as well be in some senses, because they're really going to wait until by their models the life is squished out of this country before they allow us open. And I think a couple of interesting things, one of which is the fact that it's all based on this idea that that Imperial have done a new model, and various other models have shown, claiming that if we unlocked, then we're back to thousands of deaths by the summer, which is simply implausible, isn't it? I mean, let's be honest, it's simply implausible. We didn't have restrictions through much of last summer, well, we had some, but let's be honest, face masks are not effective at controlling this disease, and social distancing basically broke down. I think we're sort of so we had very few restrictions last summer, and yet cases didn't boom until the autumn. So I think that something's really up with that, and I think also all of the models assume the vaccine is ineffective, and I know there are different sort of opinions on the vaccination amongst skeptics, and I think even amongst this podcast we'll probably find some different opinions later. But I think to claim that vaccination is our route out of this, and then to run a model that assumes that vaccines aren't effective, and then to unlock based on that model, whilst at the same time claiming that vaccines are effective, is bizarre. Either they are, in which case that's a route out, and we should be, effectively opening up now that the vulnerable have been vaccinated, or they are not, in which case they're not a route out of the lockdown, but we know that lockdown can't continue ad infinitum, so we just need to lift the lockdown and grit our teeth, because we can't keep going. So you can't sort of sit on that fence and say, well, maybe they work, maybe they don't. We're gonna assume that they don't, in terms of unlocking, but we're going to claim that they are in terms of propaganda. And I saw a bit of this because my grandmother, or my wife's grandmother, has just got a new piece of paper telling her that she's vulnerable. She needs to isolate until the end of March, despite the fact that she didn't get one last year. And despite the fact she's had both her fits of vaccines. So, she was one of the very first tranche of vaccinations, and she was able to get both of them in, which in theory means that by anyone's standards, she's completely safe. And, so do they think this is an end or not? If it is, then it needs to end quickly, and if it isn't, then there's no need to prolong the pain. We need to get out sooner rather than later on both counts. So I think it's illogical.
So basically what they're saying is that we want everyone to have the vaccine, but we're going to assume that the vaccine doesn't work and act like it's not going to work, which, as you say, is a very bizarre way of going about things at a sort of a level of ostensible caution that seems to be ridiculous, really.
And I mean, and you sit there with Boris saying we need to unlock, and I say, well, yes, of course we do. Yeah, I mean, and he'd say, this needs to be the last time. I mean, yes, of course it does. And then Matt Hancock saying, well, if we don't follow the roadmap, then we might not then we might push these dates back. And I sit there thinking, what? So you just continue pushing them back, if forever? There's no
crazy.
There's no way out of that, is there?
I can remember back in the 90s, a friend of mine who was training for ministry and had been in law when no win, no fee came in, which is very popular in the States. He said at the time, now I thought this was brilliant, because it meant that ordinary people could access legal services. But he said, just watch out. This is going to cause a culture change in terms of risk-taking, in that every institution is now going to have eyes in the back of their head wondering, who's going to go for us? Are the legal sharks going to be nipping at us, seeing an opportunity over every health and safety minor infringement? And I think if you take that, we've had that culture for a good 20 odd years. You add to that what I think we're going to discuss in a minute. Also, the kind of the sort of the scientific community at the moment, it seems to be running the government, which want to find a sort of a completely COVID zero risk-free existence, which we know is implausible. You add those two things together, I think you get this. You get what we're getting at the moment, really. As well as all the existential stuff about people are much more terrified about death than they maybe were 100 years or so ago. It's strange ingredients, isn't it, that brought us to this place.
I think our forebears would look at us very weirdly, because we're worrying about a disease that kills people by and heart, well after they would have died. It's horrible to say, even 50 years ago, the impact of COVID would have not been noticeable because most of the people who are susceptible to it would have perished long before. Which is why I suspect the places like India are not seeing huge COVID deaths, because over there they're still very much in that situation where people are dying of what have been preventable diseases in the West. But that doesn't really excuse anything, does it? I mean, the risk to the average person, even in 1970, was considered to be enough to not restrict their freedoms. Anyway, I think the government are being very incoherent about the unlocking. I'm not convinced that they have really got a plausible plan here. Boris Johnson came out recently and said we won't be unlocking any quicker, and you think, well, come on now, either it's data driven or it's not. Apparently, according to the Telegraph yesterday, we're 3 weeks already, 3 weeks ahead of the most optimistic modelling. That's obviously a moment where you have to reassess: is the modelling doing its job? Well, we don't think it's been doing its job for the last year, do we? But
can I just?
No, I mean, there were all sorts of scare stories, weren't there? I think Van Tam had something back in the summer where that he was predicting 4,000 people dying a day if various measures weren't put into place, which seems to, again, completely disproportionate. And I've been haunted by this. I've checked up on this one in several places, and maybe chaps, you've heard this one too, that 4 out of 10 infections have been sourced in hospital. That people have come into hospital without COVID and left with it.
And
40%, that's pretty high, actually.
It's really high, and it's worth noting that they are, if you're in hospital, you're already highly likely to be sick with something else, and so you end up with much higher death rates among those cohorts. It's exactly where you don't want to get COVID.
Can I just read something out that somebody's read us about? Has written to us about models. I think this is very interesting. So this person says that he spent the best part of 40 years measuring, mapping, and modeling the natural geological world. And he says models generally have limited predictive capability on complex systems. What they do is allow interpretation. This provides an understanding of how far our knowledge is from reality and is the basis of learning. We can then alter our model to fit reality, not the other way around. By continuously interrogating and improving the model, we learn more about reality. From an engineering perspective, this is all we need. It helps us to make decisions. The same should be true of epidemiology. Unfortunately, because there appears to be a belief by the authors and government that the imperial modelling can predict, nobody will learn. It's probably why Professor Ferguson has got such a poor track record, although cynically I suspect his work is more political than scientific. That's an interesting one, isn't it? So he's saying that modeling is basically about describing reality rather than predicting or indeed trying to alter reality, which is how these models have been used, isn't it? They say, well, we're going to predict something's going to happen, and the way that we're going to change that is by changing our behavior, when actually models are about describing reality and trying to learn more about reality. So
I think that's really fair. And, there are two types of models, really. There's ones which, so no one would doubt that, for example, bridges need a model. When you're an engineer and you're building a bridge, you need a model to work out where the stresses on that bridge are going to be on that new bridge. And what you do is you take data that you're certain of and that's been proved over and over again, and you use it to model a new bridge. And even then, they don't always get it quite right. If anyone remembers the resonance issues on the Millennium Bridge in London,
yes,
which
the Harry Potter film.
I have no idea.
Yes, yeah.
It was Voldemort, wasn't it, who caused the problem?
Yes.
Well, I think he destroys it, doesn't he? But I think in real life, it was actually people walking on it that caused resonance.
It was very. I remember. Actually, I was on it when it was. I was one of those people who walked across it and thought, this doesn't feel right.
Yeah. And so, even they get it wrong sometimes, but or have things that are not accounted for. And that's that sort of modeling is useful. Or you can model the spread of heat in a room from a radiator to work out where you need to put your radiator, things like that. That's pretty reliable because it's been backed up by years and years of data that fed back into it. Sort of speculative models that sort of take data and sort of run with it are really end up as being reinforcements of the biases and assumptions that you start by putting into it, and that kind of because you have to make big assumptions. All of the models assume that there's no seasonality, for example, which is a strange thing to assume, as there's clearly something causing it to go up and down. In fact, most bugs seem to go up and down through the year, whether that seasonality is due to behavior or climate or something third party like vitamin D levels from the sunshine. Who knows? That's the job of scientists to work out. But none of them are doing it, which is why we get these bizarre ones saying that even with successful vaccinations, we get thousands of deaths in August. It wouldn't happen. Let's be honest.
No, I seem to recall a study that came out a couple of weeks ago saying that COVID during the summer months in Britain, on the beaches, the track and trace seemed to indicate that there were very few people, if any, got it out in the sunshine on the beaches, which, here we had packed beaches like never before, and people are gasping about, look, this is horrible, how irresponsible. And actually, you can model it to a way to actually, it's a very safe place to be, is outdoors, having lots of vitamin D,
enjoying yourselves as well. I think it's hard to understand, to say that. I think that actually human contact is probably one of the most important things to keeping us healthy, to be perfectly honest. I don't think that's controversial, though it sounds like.
It's controversial now, Tom. It wouldn't have been controversial 18 months ago to say that.
But I was just going to say one other thing was that this is all things kind of that we knew, and all of the outrage was pretty much manufactured by police and councils.
I think Dan was having some kind of conversation with a family member, and he's forgotten to turn his microphone off for podcast listeners and indeed viewers. Carry on, Tom.
And I think it's been one of the long, the idea that the outdoor transmission is a major driver of this epidemic is nonsense, and it's been said time and again, even by Van Tam.
Why is it connected? It's connected, Dad.
Daniel, we can hear your family members.
That's they were.
It's all right. There was nothing personal was said.
No, Dad, I hate you. Just this French lesson's really boring. Her headphones just sync to my iPad.
Oh, right, okay. It's teething problems. Yeah, I mean, I think just to return to this thing about models, I don't know whether you listened to podcast last week, Tom, but I was talking about the way that models are abstractions from reality, and they're actually incredibly misleading if you confuse them with reality. apart from anything else, models are a completely sort of two-dimensional and flat way of trying to understand what's going on, because they don't take into account, I mean, apart from the variables, which are completely unquantifiable, they don't take into account the rest of reality, do they? All they do is say, you know, this is a virus that infects so many people, and if we carry on doing X, Y, and Z, then it will infect more people, and that scares people, and it causes them to forget everything else that human existence is about. And they just, all that we can see are these graphs, and think, well, we have to sort of live in such a way as to sort of to try and manipulate this data by changing our behavior. And it's all completely wrong. It's a complete misunderstanding of what a model should be or should do. And I reject this ideology which says that we have to sort of serve these models. This is an absurdity. This is not how we've ever lived our lives. And we should reject it. Let's talk about this really good article by Phil Sacker, which is called "Will Lockdown Be the End of Experts?" Yeah. It's a really good article, and Phil Sacker, I think we were saying he's a minister in the UK. Does anyone know? Yeah, is he an Anglican?
Just having a look.
He's not.
Just double check.
He's some kind of minister, isn't he? I think maybe he's evangelical. I don't know. To be honest, I'm just guessing. Do you know, Tom?
I don't know anything about him other than I've heard the name in various places.
Yeah, well, it's a good article, and basically,
here we are. Sorry, he's assistant minister at Clacton.
Oh, Clacton, really? That's where near where I used to. I grew up near Clacton. I'm from Essex.
Yeah. St John the Baptist and St Mark's, Great Clacton.
Oh, that sounds like a Anglican church. So maybe he's an evangelical Anglican. In any case, thanks so much, Phil, for writing this good article. And so he starts. It's called "Will the Lockdown Be the End of Experts?" And he begins by drawing a very perceptive parallel between Brexit and the lockdown. And he draws a number of comparisons. So I've got them here. So firstly, the experts constantly terrifying the government, not to mention the public, with doom-laden predictions about what might happen unless we take a particular path. So he's saying this is something that Brexit and the lockdown has in common. The most recent example is the government ditching plans to lift the lockdown before Easter because SAGE modelling predicted 55,000 more deaths if they did. So if we unlocked before Easter, they're saying, 55,000 more people would die, and that's why we're not. That's why this is going to go on well into the summer. At the earliest. At every point, the government have made clear that they're being followed or guided by, in inverted commas, the science, which really means the particular group of experts they have on SAGE. Almost the entirety of the establishment are behind the experts, as they were with Brexit. And there does seem to be a high correlation between the people who are most vehemently anti-Brexit and the people who are most strongly pro-lockdown, although that doesn't, of course...
Does this mean this is the revenge of the experts?
Yeah, this is.
After Brexit,
I think that's right. I mean, he says some perceptive things which we'll get to, but this is the revenge of the experts, isn't it? We didn't listen to them over Brexit. The people didn't listen to them, and we thought we were going to receive as a reward a quantifiable amount of political agency as a result. And now this is like a power grab on a scale which absolutely dwarfs the situation with the EU. This is not only it's not only a situation in which our laws and our legal system and our economy is partially governed or partially controlled from another country. It's where our entire lives are being dictated by unelected technocrats, the SAGE committee. We don't really know who these people are. We don't know what their political background is. We certainly didn't vote for them. We didn't elect them. I certainly didn't elect this man, Neil Ferguson, whose face I'm looking at now. I don't want him controlling my life. But nevertheless, they are in control, and there's very little that we can do about it. He goes on to talk about the Christian response to technocracy. And he asked the question, are the technocrats trustworthy? And basically his point here is that the technocrats are, as should be clear, human beings like everyone else. And as Christians, we believe that we are all fallen. So we all are sinful, we all are selfish, we all have biases, we're all limited in various different ways. So he says, a man may wear a white coat, but he is still a fallen man. Science may make claims to objectivity, but sadly, in the real world, it is still subject to social pressure and bias. And I think also we should include in that political bias as well. Now, I don't know anything about Neil Ferguson really, apart from the fact that he has had a string of failed predictions, which have been manifestly wrong and inaccurate, and also the fact that he broke his own lockdown in order to carry out an extramarital affair. But I'd be pretty confident that he's very left wing. I mean, the lady he was having an affair with is a climate change activist. He would be massively against Brexit, for example. And so he has a political view which would lean towards big government, which would lean towards authoritarianism, technocracy, and governmental control. And because he is in a position to exercise that control, it also is a motivation for him because it basically gives him more power to be in such a situation. So just to take a man like Neil Ferguson, just that one example should illustrate that these people are far from unbiased. They're far from unbiased. You know, he doesn't want Brexit. He doesn't want small government. He doesn't want devolved decision making. I don't mean devolved in terms of, you know, Scotland and Wales. I mean devolved in terms of family and smaller community and so on. So he wants this to happen. He's inclined towards it. And I think when you look at someone like Chris Whitty, when you look at Patrick Vallance, it's not as obvious with those people, but I think it's probably true of them as well. So anyway, I mean, we talked about quite a lot of this already, but I think let's skip to what is interesting about this this article. I mean, lots of it's interesting, but this particular aspect of it, where he talks about the end of experts, and he writes, all of this is rather depressing, but I think there are signs of hope. As lockdown goes on, I think people are beginning to ask more questions. People are beginning to ask whether the lockdowns are really worth it. For example, a lot of people are looking over to other countries who have had less restrictive lockdowns and seeing that they haven't fared any worse. And I'll just share this screen for people who might be interested, because there's a graph of deaths in different countries. Oh, my it's gone off now. Hang on a second. So there we are. We can see the UK. We can see Sweden. We can see South Africa, and they've all performed roughly the same. And I don't actually know what's going on in South Africa, but certainly in Sweden, we know they've had far less restrictive response to the lockdown, and we can see the effect it's had. Somebody wrote to me this week and said, you know, how can we claim that these measures are effective and that we need to keep doing them when we've performed so badly in terms of our ostensible deaths per million people? Now, we know, of course, that the figures are all skewed because we're not making this distinction between deaths with and deaths from COVID, but nevertheless, it's another one of these paradoxical positions that the government want us to adopt. It's a bit like kind of doublethink in 1984, isn't it? On the one hand, we've got to believe that these measures are effective and necessary, but on the other hand, they haven't actually made it any better, and we're not faring better than a country like Sweden, where they have had hardly any measures at all, certainly nothing in comparison to what we've been doing. So there's that stuff. But then he carries on saying that my hunch is that the next few months and years will see the whole government strategy over the past 12 months taken apart piece by piece. I suspect we will see at every point how the measures taken were not made on a sound scientific basis, but from panic and a desire to be seen to be doing something. I sincerely hope and pray that the experts will be shown up for what they are. I also hope these people who gave the experts unquestioning loyalty will do some serious soul searching. Now, I'd be interested to hear your take on this, chaps, because I like this article, and I very much hope he's right. But it's quite optimistic, I would think. I mean, it seems to me that...
Yeah, I'd say the same thing, actually, that if I'm reading you right, Jamie, I'm not as optimistic that you can wind back. I'm not saying mass hysteria, but elements of hysteria, of where a whole population has been in quite intense anxiety And to suddenly say, well, as lockdown begins to open up, that we're all going to suddenly get politically curious about the last year or so.
Yeah.
I just, in my gut, don't see it. I maybe see it in, like with the Iraq War.
Yeah.
10, 20 years down the line, there's a possibility that we could have a similar scenario when, now it's really hard to find anyone who puts their hand up and agrees with the 2003 Iraq invasion, and it's politically incredibly unfashionable. But at the time, not so. And the sort of military analysis and the political mind back in 2003 was pretty uncompromising about this.
Yeah.
Now I think Tony Blair probably needs to be careful what company he keeps in, because people tut and look at him through the lens of that war. But that's taken 10, 20 years to ferment. I don't see that kind of optimism as good as brilliant as I think this article is. I think this is one thing that I would say is being overstated. Maybe 10 years down the line, we might think, actually, what was going on there?
Yeah, I was going to ask actually, Daniel. The parallel with the Iraq War was something I was thinking about as well, and I don't know really, because I was quite young at the time. But what I guess my question is, why has public opinion turned against the Iraq War? Is it because of the fallout and the Well, I guess it's probably for two reasons, right? Firstly, because it was quite obvious that there never were any weapons of mass destruction, so the whole war was predicated upon a fabrication. But secondly, because people see the immense damage that the Iraq War has done in the region, and the folly of attempting to kind of invade a country and impose democracy, as though the country is sort of a completely blank canvas with no cultural or political heritage of its own. Do you think that's why?
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think when the sort of Bush-Cheney neoconism really intellectually fell apart by the end of the first decade, with the Obama administration, with Blair leaving, with seemingly a whole new generation of politicians coming in and putting a new lens on it. When the political right actually put their hand up and said, we didn't actually believe in this either.
Yeah.
When Donald Trump can say, well, I wouldn't have done this if I'd have been president.
And he wouldn't have done it.
Yeah, when you have those sort of voices, I think, and it plays to a lot of progressive ideas and movies and things that the Iraq War was largely a bit of an oil grab as well. So.
I was going to say, Daniel, I mean, I guess my question that arises is what parallels arise from that and the situation here. I think that one of the analogies is that as time goes on, clearly people will feel the damage from what's happened more and more. People are feeling it already, but more people will feel it. For example, when the furlough scheme eventually ends, or when the economy crashes, whichever happens first, people will lose their jobs and people will be poorer as a result. So there'll be that. I think perhaps where there's a disanalogy is one of the things which is problematic about the Iraq War for us, I think, politically, is that it's very easily characterized as an act of imperialism. And in fact, I think that personally that's what it is. It is an act of imperialism. It's an attempt to impose our culture on a culture which is completely foreign and has different custom and heritage and religious background and all sorts of things. It's a very arrogant, myopic way of thinking about our country's relationship to another country. So I think it's easy to reject politically, both from a left perspective and also from a right perspective. I think the political issue that underlies this is different, because it's I see this as the antagonistic clash between people who believe in democracy and a government which is limited to a reasonable size, and people who are basically technocrats and authoritarians. I think that's what this is about, ultimately. And I think that Saka is right to imply, at least, that that's what Brexit was about as well. Ultimately, I think the issue is with both conversations is around sovereignty, and who should make decisions about our lives, essentially. Now, for me, I would want to say that the people should be able to make decisions about their own lives, about their own individual lives and their own families and their own communities as far as possible, and that the government should be not involved in those decisions as far as possible, and only should only make decisions which infringe upon people's ability to make decisions in cases which are necessary and reasonable. But the authoritarian technocratic point of view appears to be that we can't make our own decisions. We're too irresponsible, we're too immoral, we're too stupid, and the government should be telling us how to live our lives for us. And that's a position which, personally, I don't see what's attractive about it, because there are only ever going to be a handful of people who are making those decisions. So everyone's going to be basically bullied and bossed around by the government. And
it's weird, Jamie, because there's pretty much the same people who make the claim that as a species, as humankind, we're starting to transcend our crude roots. That we spoke about this a few weeks ago. The idea that the modern humanity is better than than what's gone before. And yet at the same time, they don't really believe that, do they? Because they don't think our individual, decision making is better. What they think is that the institutions we've built are better, and that is, to put it frankly, a load of cobblers. Our decision making bodies are just as arcane, corrupt, and foolish as they ever have been.
Yeah, incompetent, sinful, immoral.
Yeah.
Just as much as at any other time. Yeah. Can you add to this also that in consumer culture, we are all overwhelmed by data. I think it's been said that compared to someone in 1921, we consume 20 times the volume of information, whether it's just simply walking down the street and being hit by adverts, sounds, shop fronts, phone noises, what have you, or just through flicking through television and the internet. And so consumer culture, it's programmed in such a way that people want answers fast, and they want answers that they can digest. If you look at a typical newspaper, even a broadsheet, much of it is analysis rather than news. So the journalist is taking away from you the ability to digest news and to make your own analysis. I haven't got time to do that. Just give me, I'm getting this paper because it's politics, so hopefully this paper can give me the slant that I need, that colours the day, and eventually probably informs my social actions as well as my vote. And I think there's an element of that we've become lazy as a culture in terms of our ability to do that sort of philosophical thinking, do the number crunching, do the logic, and speak back with rhetorical passion.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful, Daniel. One of the reasons that I increasingly feel that this is happening is because this is the first time that we've had that proliferation of information coupled with a post-Christian philosophy or view of life. And Phil Saka makes a similar point here, where he talks about the way that our society's greatest fear is death. And although we know everyone dies, we pretend it's not the case. So in our society, when a scientist comes along, and tells us that I can save thousands of lives simply by following a particular course of action, people find it persuasive. And if they're genuinely scared, then the power of the scientist will be, as he writes here, almost unlimited. And I think that's the one of the fundamental dynamics that's powering this whole situation, is that if you're a Christian, and I mean, if you're a Christian and you really believe Christianity, if you really believe the gospel, then of course death is a fearful thing, and frequently a terrible thing as well. But it's not the ultimate thing, because we believe that in Christ, we believe in the resurrection, we believe that there's a hope beyond death. But if you don't believe any of those things, then death is the ultimate evil. And if somebody says that I can save you from death if you do X, Y, and Z, it puts them in an incredibly powerful position. And I do think that mixture of the secularity of the society that we live with and the consequent fear of death, coupled with the proliferation of information, the speed of information through the internet and through social media, is the toxic brew, is part of the toxic brew, at least, that's caused this situation to come about. So I think that's a really well observed point, Daniel, and I think Phil Sacker makes a good point here. Boys, do we want to say anything else about this? I mean, Tom, what do you think is going to happen in the next few years? Do you think people are going to turn against the lockdown and think it was a terrible mistake, or do you think they're going to want more lockdown forever?
Do you know, I'm really...
We've had a bit of an internet pause here. Tom appears to have frozen entirely, half inside and half outside of his Gothic church painting of a background. He's completely gone, Daniel. This is he has
caught a time trap.
It might be his computer that he built with his own hands that's caused the problem. So I think maybe Daniel, let's Never mind. Yeah, I think maybe rather than trying to anticipate and guess what he might have said, I think we should move on to. Oh, Tom is connecting to the audio. He might be coming back.
No.
Let's see if he's.
Hello, here I am.
Oh, you're back.
I'm back, but it's different. So just to is the sound quality okay?
Yeah, your sound quality. You look kind of like a wild man, but we can hear what you're saying. Yeah, that's better.
You look like you've been to Narnia and back.
Yeah, it's been 30 years. I spent some time as the king of Narnia.
You've thought of that question.
You look like
Jamie gave you. You now have an answer.
All right.
42.
I'm on my phone now. Sorry, I should have mentioned that it seems to be a different part of my computer goes wrong every week, and this week it's the power unit is on its last legs.
Fairly important part of your computer.
Yeah, and I thought I had it sorted. It was sort of running stably, and then suddenly off it went.
You sound fine, Tom. You sound fine.
Good. So I was just giving my opinion on the Phil Sacker article, which and about how things will look in a few years. Do you know what? I'm very worried that there's far too many vested and powerful interests in the idea that this has been a success.
Yeah.
That we will be in a situation where lockdown skeptics are not looked upon kindly for many years. Many years. I mean, it's not a hope really, because I hope that the economy recovers, and but I strongly suspect that the longer it takes to pay off the enormous debt, and especially if we see some sort of awful inflation or post crisis economic issues, then things might be different. But if the magic money tree doesn't burn down, I think people could be quite insulated from the damage that this has done across the world. That's not going to be the case in other countries, of course. I think in sort of poorer countries across Africa and Asia, it's a lot worse, and there'll be much more obvious problems. But I think we might be a bit too insulated here.
Yeah.
But I can always be hopeful. I don't think that we're going to see sort of big sort of court cases, much like we never saw big court cases about Iraq. You know, as some lockdown skeptics like to hope. But let's just hope they never try it again, hey? That's the one thing, you know, when something isn't repeatable, and this obviously isn't repeatable, it's not moral to start it in the first place. It's another good ethical argument against lockdown is it's not repeatable.
Yeah.
If we kept doing it every year, we would obviously end up unable to feed ourselves. So I'm hoping the government have learnt their lesson there, and at least cool heads in the civil service might. We might end up in a reality where it's politically impossible to call a lockdown again. But
well, in many ways, I mean, I think I've said this the last couple of weeks, with the advent of this vaccine, whether or not this vaccine is actually doing what it's, and I mean this quite literally, whether it works or not, this story works as a kind of hermetically sealed narrative, right? So there was this big virus, nobody knew how to deal with it. We developed a vaccine, we vaccinated everyone, now everyone's fine. And that works as a narrative, doesn't it? There's no need to perpetuate that narrative if you don't want to. You can stop it right there. Even if, I mean, and we all agree that this whole thing was unnecessary. We should never have done this, and we've never done this in the past. So as a narrative, in order to get out of this, the vaccine could be said to be the end of it, right? And then if there is a variant or something else, you just play it down. You develop another vaccine, but in a low key way, like you do with flu or whatever. So I could see it functioning as a hermetically sealed narrative, which exists in itself. And if I were, obviously I'm not, but if I were in any way influential, I would want to say to the government, just do that, for goodness sake. I've just been looking at the vaccination figures, and 20 million people have been vaccinated in England, I think it is. Just leave it there, and don't ever do this again, because as you say, Tom, if we do, we're going to end up absolutely destroying our economy, but not just our economy, but obviously all the other stuff we've talked about, like our culture and our infrastructure and so on and so forth. Let's
not pretend that money isn't just a convenient way of accounting for limited resources. So, we shouldn't be ashamed of saying we really need a economy that functions, because we all need resources in the end. It's useful to be able to eat, and I don't really want to be in a situation where I have to turn to small harding and dig up my vicarage garden in order to survive, which, I think if we kept doing lockdowns, we'd end up in that situation. We'd be back in a sort of medieval smallholding situation, but with a population that's far too big.
Smallhold, Tom, I have to say.
I could do it, Jamie. I would love it. I particularly wanted to keep pigs because I love bacon.
Yeah, I could see you rolling around in the muck with some pigs, Tom.
No, Jamie. Don't get me wrong. I would eat them. Not play with them.
A few goats as well. Yeah.
A few goats. Yeah, I like a goat.
Goat milk.
I'd have to learn how to grow something other than courgettes.
Yeah.
I can grow chilies and tomatoes. Those are my two successful pieces of horticulture.
Both of which could go in a bacon sandwich.
Both of which
I can do crest.
Yes.
do you do it one of those sort of rice-filled socks, Daniel?
Yes, that's about it. that's my gardener's world expertise. I'd live on crest.
Very good. Can we talk a little bit about what's happened with vaccine news this week? Because this is an issue which particularly exercises me. So this week we've had a number of people sort of speaking out in favor of the vaccine, and if you were to be cynically minded about this, you might say that these people are trying to pressurize people who don't want to have the vaccine to have it. And top of the list, it does actually disappoint me to say, is the Queen, who has uncharacteristically spoken out in favor not just of having the vaccine herself, but in encouraging other people to have it. So I've got a couple of quotations from her here. As far as I can make out, it was quite harmless. It was very quick, and I've had lots of letters from people who have been very surprised by how easy it was to get the vaccine, and the jab didn't hurt at all. And then the more slightly controversial one is, she said, the other thing is that it is obviously difficult for people if they've never had a vaccine, but they ought to think about other people rather than themselves. Now, in some ways, I think. Do you remember, chaps, how on previous episodes I've been speaking vehemently in favour of the royal family, and particularly the Queen, and said I will defend the Queen, and I really like the Queen, and obviously pledge fealty to her. But these comments are strange.
Do they stretch a little sort of rebellious Republican inside you, Jamie? Do they feed the disestablishment beast that lurks behind your ever so sort of innocent face? No,
You found your inner Cromwell.
Well, I mean, not that quite that far, but I wonder why the Queen feels the need to try and.
It'd be because she was told to, Jay. I mean, let's be under no illusions. I mean, one of the weaknesses, I guess, of a constitutional monarchy is that the Queen effectively has to do what she's told.
Right.
And I mean, I guess I'd rather that than sort of some sort of divine monarchy. Although I suspect that the Queen would have made a better sort of executive head of state than any of our prime ministers in the last 20 years.
Can I just address this issue then? And Tom, I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are on this, because I kind of said a similar thing last week. So just to start from, somebody on Twitter this week has called me selfish because I don't want to have the vaccine. And I said back to him that I don't see what difference it makes if I have the vaccine or not. Because if you're worried about this virus and you want to have the vaccine, you can have it, and then you will be, providing the vaccine actually works, you will be prevented from catching the disease to a high degree of probability, and indeed your immune system gives you something like a 99.7% chance of surviving it anyway. So it makes very, very little difference to anyone if people don't get the vaccination, if the vaccinations work. If the vaccinations don't work, then there's no point in having them anyway. So I don't really see, firstly, so that's my first point. I don't really see, when the Queen says, for example, think about other people, I don't really see how it's relevant whether or not an individual has a vaccine to other people. And then there's a second issue here, which is that this accusation of selfishness cuts both ways, doesn't it? Because if you're going to say, I'm selfish for not wanting to have a vaccine, I would say, I think it's far more selfish to tell somebody who is not at all at risk from a particular virus that they have to have a vaccine that has, I would say, that has not been tested adequately, particularly in terms of the long-term effects, to protect myself from a virus that I'm not even at risk from. So basically, you're telling me that I'm selfish for not wanting to have a vaccination for a virus that doesn't threaten me, and that the vaccination itself could hurt me. So it seems to me to be at least as selfish to say that. And I would actually say I think it's far more selfish, considering that it actually affects the person who's forced to have the vaccine, and it doesn't affect people if other people don't take the vaccine. So I don't know. What's does anyone have a response to that? Maybe my logic is wrong.
Yeah, I suppose what we're seeing on one degree, isn't it, is it is something that's very human, isn't it? That people feel if you don't join in with X, Y, and Z, then somehow you are you're going against the crowd. So you're sort of pulling down people's morale. You know, this is a group. I don't want to say group.
Like
maybe it's being disingenuous saying group thing, but there is a sort of collective. You're going against the collective.
It's like not playing sort of parcel at someone's birthday party.
Yeah. So another parallel would be to say, you know, it's in essence, you're not taking the vaccine is almost like a sort of intellectual heresy that you're, and that makes people think that you're questioning their own motives. So you're creating discomfort in going against the grain.
Yeah, and I think there's elements of that, particularly the sort of intellectual kind of heresy issue, and then there's sort of, I think I probably would take the vaccine unless it's coerced in any way. the moment it becomes coerced, I will step out. I'm not about to enter into a sort of a situation where I feel coerced to do it, and I don't think anyone should ever be coerced to take a medical treatment.
Tom,
In the
do
end, the only
you
person.
not really think you are being coerced psychologically?
Well, to a degree, yes. I think, and I was going to say, and I think this includes probably using public opinion to coerce, even if. But I mean, certainly, a line would be crossed if the government allows any sort of vaccination passports to happen. That I would just step back and say, well, actually, I'm not prepared to enter into this contract with the state.
So
I think,
Tom, can I ask? I'm interested to hear what else you have to say about it. But why would you take the vaccine? What would be your motivation?
my main motivation, Jamie, would be to reassure those elderly people who don't really understand but are very worried and panicked, who I would like to be able to visit and give them reassurance. And I just for their sakes, really, not for mine, so that they don't feel they have to. So, for example, there's one gentleman who I know who is sadly passing away, and I said, well, would you like me to come and bring you communion and pray with you? And he said, and I said, he said, actually, I'd rather have the other minister who's had a vaccine because he's more elderly than I, because he's worried about, in his sort of everything on top of this, kind of. He's worried about COVID as well, and just in that sense, I might take it just for that reason. The reason I wouldn't take it is because we don't actually know what the risks are for younger people of taking this vaccine. We don't have there's a sort of risk reward thing that's obviously the case if you're in a demographic which has a sort of 10% chance of dying from COVID if you catch it. But if you're in an age, as I am, where the chance is very, very much an outside chance, there's also an outside chance of serious danger from the vaccine.
Yeah. Yeah, and that to me is why I would never take it. Because, well, I don't know about never take it, but I wouldn't take it at the moment because we don't know what the long-term effects are. I mean, it could give you cancer. It could make you infertile.
Or even the effects we do know about, Jamie. We know that a sort of small selection of people have going to sort of various forms of allergic reactions from it. That's documented. There are lots of medicines you take that have potentially small chances of quite severe side effects. We're quite used to that, and vaccines aren't any different.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, you take those medicines because you think that having the medicine is more positive than not having that medicine, and it's something that's finally judged by doctors. If in the case of a vaccine, much like in the case of the flu vaccine, we don't give it and generally compel people to have it or even recommend people have it unless they have particular risks that make it to balance out that risk. Otherwise, you end up in a situation where you start sort of medicalizing everything,
Yeah.
And there's a sort of tendencies in society for that anyway, which is quite dangerous. This whole statins thing, where the sort of idea, or we just take it just in case. But actually, there's always risks and there's always a trade-off. And unless you're kind of a medical professional, you can't make those trade-offs. And even then, you can only advise. And sort of the idea of sort of bodily autonomy is held, I think, quite sacrosanct by a lot of doctors. Unfortunately, not by our medical health, our public health doctors, who don't seem to have that sort of concept of what it means to actually consent. So that's a complicated way of saying yes, I would take it, but I think that actually everyone should be able to have that free and a non-coerced choice to make. And that if at a certain point with the state level coercion, I would actually man the barricades with those who don't want to take it full stop. And actually, we need to stand up and say, unless this is an actual free choice, it shouldn't be offered.
Yeah, it's interesting when you push that forward, isn't it? But what are we going to do when it? What would we do, for instance, if the schools said we only want to educate children who are vaccinated? Because already there are trials on children, and you do have to think, well, if this is something that the chances of a teenager dying of this are minuscule.
Yeah, they're
And statistically negligible. I think we're talking about 2 or 3 people within the United Kingdom, and those had underlying conditions. Why would you vaccinate the population under 18? And where would the whole business of consent go on that? And presuming that the vaccine, I think particularly the Oxford one is very similar to the flu vaccine on the same basis, that you'd have to have an update. You'd have to have it every few years. There are quite a lot of ethical question marks there.
Yeah, I mean, I just to jump in, Daniel. I mean, I think that these are more than ethical question marks. A listener writes in, David Chapman, who raised all these questions, basically as you've just done, Daniel. So I wanted to just say thank you to David for doing that, because I did plan on speaking about this. I think this idea of vaccinating children for COVID-19 is unethical. I think it's totally wrong. Children are not at risk from this virus. They've already had their education completely messed up. They're being dehumanized and degraded by being forced to wear masks at school. And now we're talking about potentially force vaccinating them in order to get an education for a virus that poses absolutely no risk to them. I mean, it's in my opinion, it's totally outrageous. And I do go back to this thing of, we don't know what the long-term effects of these vaccines are. We could not know. So this is one of the reasons I think, sorry about getting excised about this, but this is one of the reasons I think this whole thing is morally dubious, to say the least. Is that what you say is right. The way that they calculate things is a risk-reward thing, where they know there is some risk. They know there is a risk. They know the vaccine will damage a certain amount of people, but they think the risk is offset by the benefit of the protection you get from COVID-19 by taking the vaccine. But the thing I object to is that they're not upfront about that. We never ever hear about the risks of the vaccine. It's just constantly denied. And anyone who brings it up is labeled an anti-vaxxer. And we're being constantly pressurized into taking these vaccines and being told from everyone, even the Queen, that they're entirely safe. And I'm sorry, but if you don't know the long-term effects of something, you can't say it's safe. And I've asked this question over and over again. How can you say something is safe when you don't know what the long-term effects are? And if you're going to vaccinate millions of children, you better be damn sure that this vaccine is safe and it's not going to make these children infertile, or it's not going to give them cancer or something like that. And since they can't do that, I would say that it's completely unethical for them to do this, and that these children will be vaccinated in the service of an immoral ideology. That's my view.
Absolutely. I think certainly in the case of children, there needs to be a real demonstration that the harms of COVID are worse than the potential harms of the vaccine over a long period. I think that balance changes as you get older, and the harms of COVID are obviously much higher. But even for a 90-year-old, there needs to be a real choice, because otherwise we end up in instant medical coercion. And as I said 2 weeks ago, that is previously unthinkable in Western democracies. The only person who can decide for anyone what their risk is the person themselves, and what they're prepared to do.
Yeah.
That is, that's the starting point of freedom, isn't it? And if we're not even free to choose without coercion, which I think is almost as bad as compulsion, especially when done by the state, then what freedom do we actually have?
Yeah, I completely agree, Tom. And I think, just to round out what I was just saying about children as well, is that children should be prioritized. Their well-being and their opportunity should be prioritized over people who are in their 80s and 90s. I'm sorry, but those people have had their lives, largely speaking, they've had their opportunities, they've had their prosperity, much more prosperity than our generation will ever have, and certainly our children. We shouldn't wreck our children's lives and their opportunities and their futures in order to perpetuate an ideology which is in the service of people who are basically older than the average life expectancy. It's totally wrong. It's totally the opposite way around the way things should be.
Unfortunately, that ship sailed a year ago, Jamie, when Boris Johnson decided to close the schools. And from that point, the harms against children have been mounting up. Again, unquantifiable harms that was never really looked at. One of the harms of effectively missing a year of school. There are serious harms there. We there's a reason in normal life that we fine parents for taking their children out from one day, because we claim that it's a harm to the children. It's going to be a hard argument to make next year, isn't it?
And the economic damage, the limitation
and all those,
for people who are coming out of education for the first time, either after GCSE, A level or university, the job market will be massively limited. Maybe, just to return to our conversation a few minutes ago, maybe this will be how public opinion turns against this stuff, when all these young people grow up and they realise how that we've wrecked their future.
Well, I mean, I think there's hope there, maybe, Jamie, because remember the Cambridge Debating Society was won by the House proposition that lockdowns were a mistake.
I think the only thing I'd say to that is there's the danger that healthcare technocracy muscles in the next. I think particularly in the next 6 months might be quite crucial in that sort of game plan. That if you begin to have healthcare passports that are internal, so you can't go to the pub, you can't go to the gym, you can't go to school without having whatever test, temperature, passport, app, that reinforces anxiety. And I did hear, if I remember rightly, Van Tam certainly say, well, this could be used, was it Hancock? We could use some of this tech for, seasonal flu.
Yeah, it's probably Hancock.
And so you begin to say, well, we could deploy all of this on all sorts of things.
There's already mutterings.
You couldn't enter Tesco's if you got a temperature in 5 years' time. Now that might not be COVID, that might be whatever. It could be especially flu. It could be, and you think, oh well, go back to the car park.
Especially as I know my sister who has a toddler became very aware once that toddler started nursery that temperatures happen quite often. The regular Tuesday afternoon nursery bug. I also think that there's a danger that things like masks might stick around rather too long. And one awful thing I saw this morning in Susan Mitchell, the communist and behavioural psychologist on Sage, saying that she thought that primary school children should be masked, not because it did much, but rather because it normalised masking in society.
It's disgusting.
And it is revolting. The idea that this should be normalised at the end, it should never have been brought in. Let's be honest. There's no real evidence that they do enough to make it all the effort worthwhile. They became a totemistic rather than anything else. But and not least because of people like Susie Mitchell pushing the idea that people that having them around made people more aware that they ought to be doing other things. But I think what sort of strange person wants masks to be normalised?
For young children.
Not young children and adults. You're saying that they'll be normalised, through.
My son. We're homeschoolers, so we're not sending our kids to school. But my son's 4.5, right, and he would have gone to school this year. So she's essentially saying that she wants him in a mask, and she wants to normalise the covering of children's faces that young. I think that's demonic. Personally, I think it's diabolical. I think it's
consider how it contrasts that with a couple of years back. About all the debate and drama over very strict Islamic schools where teachers were wearing full burqas, and pupils maybe as well, and the outcry and various experts coming on saying it's really important for a child to see the face of the teacher and for the teacher to see the face of the child. It's all part of the humanity and the education of that person. And various people from all sorts of walks of life were decrying this. And yet here we are totally normalising something actually not that different. I was watching someone in Tesco's who had a sort of mask up to here, sort of basically almost like a balaclava and then a beanie here.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, 2-3 years ago, I know there are certain malls and things, shopping malls in the UK, where they wouldn't have been allowed in, would they?
Yeah.
No. I mean, it's been the traditional uniform of the bank robber is the mask, isn't it? The dehumanising mask that meant you couldn't be identified. There's a reason for that.
Yeah, it's indicative. It's a visual illustration of everything the technocrat wants, which is to completely dehumanize people and to treat them as cogs in a machine. Yeah, mute them, treat them as cogs in a machine, take away their individuality, and just to control and manipulate them through centralized propaganda and force. I think I think it's evil, particularly when it's applied to children. Just to put in here, and I'll put this on the show notes. I signed a petition recently saying do not roll out COVID-19 vaccine passports, and that's going to be debated in Parliament because hundreds of thousands of people have signed it. It's going to be debated on Monday, the 15th of March at 4:30 p.m. So that'll be after next week's show. So I'll mention it again on
okay.
But
something to pray into, I think, if you're praying. So
pray and also sign the petition. Write to your member of Parliament. This whole thing with vaccine passports is deeply disturbing. I mean, we spoke about it on last week's show. I do want to mention people have been vaccinated. So, chaps, we've been talking a long time. I did want to also maybe we don't want any more vaccination talk, but I did want to talk about this video that was made by church leaders about vaccination. Have we got the stomach for this, or should we leave it?
Blimey, Jamie. I mean, let's just. The one thing that came to mind was the church stopped giving medical advice about 1500s when sort of medicine sort of separated itself from theology. In the universities, that's a complete guess. Someone can write in and tell me exactly when it happened. But the idea that the church should be recommending medical procedures. That's sort of spiritual coercion. Could one make an argument that it comes under spiritual abuse as a safeguarding issue? I don't know. Maybe you could.
Trying to coerce vulnerable people into medical treatment.
The second video, the one where it was bishops and various people, because there was a first video, it was 13 bishops.
Yeah.
All sort of giving about a 10-second line of "I'm taking it when my time comes," and then the Bishop of London saying, "I used to be a nurse, and if you don't take it, you could be putting your loved ones at risk." Then the second video came out, which had various sort of young Christians and a whole range of people and one or two other bishops in it, and it struck me that is it a shame that that we've never done a video like that for Holy Communion?
Yeah,
and I began to. I had to create this spoof version of it, I'm taking Holy Communion and I recommend that you take it too.
Yeah.
Or I've taken Holy Communion and it's caused me no harm.
Yeah.
Please, for the sake of your soul, take Holy Communion. It just had that wonderful British seriousness. And I just thought, why have you never done a video earnestly promoting, was it St. Irenaeus who called it the medicine of immortality?
Yeah.
But it's strange how we found the energy to get various people to deliver this video, but fair enough.
Oh,
But we've never done it. We've never done it really for anything spiritual, supernatural, sacramental, with any sense of urgency, and that's what's extraordinary.
Well, that's one thing. One thing that's extraordinary. I mean, there are many things extraordinary about the idea of the church doling out advice about medicine. I mean, it is coercion, isn't it? I mean, that's why I say, only half jestingly is this spiritual abuse, to use your position as a spiritual advisor to advocate for things that are not spiritual. Strikes me as a very dicey ground for those 13 bishops to be standing on.
Also, I'd say actually, it's probably the wrong playbook as well. I'm writing something on this at the moment, that when it comes particularly to religious conservatives, deference went out the window years ago. So the idea of, take this because I'm a bishop.
Yeah.
Believe me, because I'm a prelate. I think that's a non-runner, because that whole sort of culture within religious groups, particularly conservative traditional religious groups, has a bit of an antipathy to authority. As much as we might have a theology for bishops, particularly the Anglo-Catholic movement, we've also had an adversarial relationship with them. So, I think a lot of even the sort of wilder conspiracy theories are generally anti-establishment, anti-elite. Deference has gone out the window years ago. So, having someone in authority tell you to do this is actually the least believable option.
The only people who would listen are the people who'd be doing it anyway. Yes,
exactly.
I mean, I'm hoping that there's just as energetic a debate in the Church Times as over other recent things, which we haven't really time to talk about that either. But I mean, it's an honour to be in the presence of a troublemaker. Was it a scoundrel or a scallywag?
Rascal, I think.
Rascal. There we are.
Last week's the Spectator lobby, according to the Procurator of Canterbury, is calling deep stress to a clergy.
Yeah, I mean, you're so clearly a spreader of immense stress and anxiety, Daniel. I mean, you only have to look at your irenic countenance to know that. The video I saw, chaps, was it was.
I'll have to get going in a minute.
Oh right, okay, sure, okay. Should we say? Okay, should we say bye now, Daniel? And I'll
that'd be lovely.
All right, thanks for coming on,
Thank you, Daniel.
And have a good.
Take care. God bless.
God bless. Bye.
And
see, if you remember with Holy Communion, I'd recommend take it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I try to take it daily.
I've taken it, and it works for me, and it didn't hurt.
No.
For your own good and the good of your community. Bye, Daniel.
God bless. Bye.
So Tom, the one I watched was church leaders across the UK uniting to promote the vaccine, essentially. And it's funny because it's called the Give Hope campaign. So they sort of lead up to this, COVID's so terrible and we need to have hope, etc. And in any normal situation, you would expect them to start speaking about Christ and the gospel, but they don't. They start saying, you should have the vaccine. And I just,
it's exactly what we were talking about, wasn't it? Back in December now, when the whole vaccine news came through, and the hope is in the vaccine. Do you know what? I hope that church leaders wouldn't make the mistake of confusing people, because obviously they're not talking to be charitable to them. They're not talking the sort of salvific hope of Christ when they talk about the vaccine. But they're using exactly the same language coming from exactly the same people. It's something you've got to do with care. It's not there. Our only hope in this world is in Christ, not in the vaccines, as we say before. And our only hope in our leaders is that they're God-fearing and godly people, as Phil Sarker points out.
At the very least, it's a missed opportunity, isn't it? To say,
at the very least, it's a huge missed opportunity. And I think actively damaging. And it's once again sort of perhaps much like the churches that have chosen to shut down because their local bookshop has chosen to shut down, which then makes the equivalence in everyone's head. Well, they obviously don't think of themselves as any more important than the local bookshop, which I personally think the church is far more important than just about anything else in society. The worship of the church is an essential to society. They're making exactly the same problem for people, which is that if you were a non-believer, you might look at them and think, well, they clearly don't actually have that much hope in Christ, because their actual hope, when it all comes down to it, is in a vaccine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just think they're acting like Erastian puppets of the government, basically, to tackle much of the misinformation that has caused distrust, particularly in Black majority community and churches. And what they say is, oh, the vaccine's safe, it's been tested. And they don't engage with any of the questions that we've been raising. They don't engage with the question of the long-term effects of the vaccine, or what effects the vaccine would have, for example, on pregnant women or women who are nursing infants. And the actual questions that the people are asking. And I think that this thing of saying anyone, or implying at least that anyone who doesn't want to take the vaccine or is hesitant is some kind of victim of misinformation. I think it's incredibly patronizing. And the best way of dealing with this situation would be to be honest, and to give honest answers to difficult questions. But I don't think they want to give honest answers, because I think the honest answers would put people off having the vaccine. And instead they act like this is just one big conspiracy theory, and anyone who disagrees with any of this is the victim of misinformation. And I think for church leaders to be perpetuating this, I mean, we won't play the video now because it would just be too much, but I'll put it on the show notes. But it's utterly, I just think it's utterly patronizing, to be honest.
It's patronizing. It's inappropriate as well. It's just inappropriate. They shouldn't be in the business of giving out health advice. They can commend if they like, but claiming that it's safe becomes a level of expertise they don't have.
Yeah.
And as listeners may know, I am in general in favour of the vaccine. I think it's a good thing, but we need to be honest about what we do and don't know about it. And if we're not honest and something happens, then we could be in serious trouble.
Yeah, and the only way we're actually going to find out whether anything's going to happen is by observing the results in
long-term trials. I mean, this is what critics of the vaccine are saying, aren't they? That this is basically a trial on the population. If you give 20 million people a vaccine and more, they want to vaccinate everyone. You give 60 million people a vaccine, and there's some kind of side effect which affects 1% of people. That's going to be an awful lot of people who are going to become unwell. So there we are. Tom, should we say a prayer at the end of this episode? I think so, yeah. We need to. Shall I pray, or do you want to go for it? No, you go ahead, Jamie. You go ahead.
Okay, let's pray before we finish. Dear Lord, we thank you for this conversation. We pray for your blessing, your peace to be in our hearts and in the hearts of all our listeners. We pray for our government, for you to give them wisdom and guidance at this time. We pray for our church leaders, that you would lead them in things of wisdom and holiness and goodness and discernment and truth. And we commit this conversation into your hands. We pray for your blessing, protection upon us and everyone who listens to this show. And we ask all these things through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for listening and for watching. And if you'd like to email, to be honest with you, I'm getting so many emails. It's great. I can just about respond to them all, but it's hard to sort of keep tabs on them and to read them out in any sort of systematic way on the show. But please do get in touch anyway at irreverendpod@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at irreverendpod. Rate us on iTunes or wherever else. And do share the show around because we want people to engage with us and to see what we've got to say, and hopefully it's interesting or even useful or helpful to people. So that's the end, really. Tom, are you any closing thoughts?
No, that's it. God bless you all.
God bless everyone. See you next time.